School program. This is the first Saturday school of 2024. Okay, thank you guys so much for coming out. Today we are so happy to have John from the DC Alliance Against Racism and Political Repression, also known as the Alliance or AARPR, speaking with us today about community control of police. A little background, the Claudia Jones School. We aim to do political education and just create spaces where, we have a lot of amazing orgs that will do very specific and timely poly-ed events on things like Palestine, but we like to do series and step back and look at big picture things like what is community control of the police. We also had our fall events last October and November on, for example, are we still in a socialist moment? We're really big on, political education, pedagogy, and having really substantive discussions, both with our amazing speakers and then also the other people who are at our events. So that's a little bit about the Saturday School. Anything else to add, Ryan?
Yeah, I will just say, just to keep in mind, we do want this to be more interactive, so please use the resource page. If you need a pen or something, just write down any questions that you may have. We do have some built-in discussion questions as well, so you'll have a chance to turn to the folks around you and actually get into discussion. So please feel free to, interact with us in the ways that you feel necessary if something comes up.
Yeah, this is not a lecture. This is an opportunity for you to meet new people, build some connections, and talk about what hopefully in the coming years will be a really meaningful political force within DC. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to John to get us started. John, why don't you introduce yourself and take it away?
Thank you. Thank you, Ryan, Hannah. My name is John. I'm a member of the DC Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. Just a quick show of hands, who here has heard of the Alliance before? Nice, great. Claudia Jones School is actually one of our partner organizations, right? We are a united front. We're a coalition of progressive grassroots organizations. We have, off the top of my head, I can't give you all the list of all the organizations that are involved in the Alliance, but Claudia Jones is one of them. Anak Bayan, PYM is one. Today we're going to talk about a little bit about the history of the Alliance, our campaign for community control of the police, and the victories that have come from the Chicago Alliance on their campaigns for community control of the police. So all that, we can go ahead and get started. All right. Also, bear with me. I'm using this thing for the first time. Yeah, I know, right? All right. Let's see. Okay. So the DC Alliance, or DCAARPR, we're the DC branch of the National Alliance, or NARPR. Like I said, we're a united front, and our two major campaigns are for community control of the police, and we also act as a mass defense organization against political repression. We see kind of the writing on the wall as we organize, as we fight back against these repressive state apparati. They will come down with political repression, right? That's really their kind of first line of defense, is repressing activists and organizers. And so we find it incredibly important to have an organized community and network that is able to fight back against that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. So first, I want to talk about the history of the National Alliance, how it kind of came about. In 1970, Angela Davis was arrested on kidnapping, conspiracy, and murder charges. In August of that year, at the trial of James McClain, who was charged for stabbing a prison guard, Jonathan Jackson, brother and comrade of George Jackson, kidnapped and held hostage the judge Harold Haley, the DA, and 3 jurors in an attempt to free his brother and the rest of the Soledad brothers. A shootout ensued on their way to their hideout. The shootout killed the judge, Jonathan Jackson, and 2 Quinton inmates. Rushel McGee and the DA were wounded, and the guns allegedly belonged to Angela Davis, and she was tried on several charges in connection to the escape attempt. So thus, the campaign to free Angela Davis and other political prisoners started. The key players were the Communist Party USA and the National Council of Black Lawyers. After 18 months and 5 days before her trial, Davis was released on bail and she was subsequently acquitted of all charges. This kind of showed the organizers and activists in the moment that, okay, we need, right, an organization to fight against political repression. So afterwards, Charlene Mitchell, Angela Davis, Ann Braden, and 700 organizers founded the National Alliance in 1973 in Chicago. Since its inception, the National Alliance, as well as its regional chapters, they continue to struggle for justice with a focus on the following goals. This is on their website. I'll just read out a couple of them. The number one, community control of the police, freeing political prisoners and other innocents, stopping all police torture of suspects, abolishing the death penalty, fighting racism, sexism, homophobia, anti-Semitism, immigrant bashing, religious discrimination, and all other forms of bigotry, defending the rights of labor, defending civil liberties, exposing the prison industrial complex and the war on drugs as the root of the new Jim Crow, securing healthcare for prisoners, supporting affirmative action, dismantling systemic racism, among other things. So in the 80s, NARPR worked to free many political prisoners and the wrongfully convicted, including the current executive director of the National Alliance, Frank Chapman. Though in the decades to follow, the work had died out in most cities except for Chicago. The national structure and character of the work had shifted, and many of the organizations felt the need to focus on their own work. But however, in 2019, more than 1,200 people, including Angela Davis and Frank Chapman, and many elected officials, trade unionists, and other progressive activists joined together in Chicago to refound NARPR and resurrect its mission. Frank Chapman, he stated, quote, "We did not call you to this refounding conference of the National Alliance to commemorate or celebrate what we did 46 years ago. We called you here to join us in rededicating ourselves to defend the inalienable democratic right of our people, of oppressed nations and workers to rise up and overthrow their oppression in this present moment of history." So this also, the refounding, it was sparked by the murder of Rekia Boyd and Laquan McDonald in Chicago, and the Alliance and its partners, took up their mission again. So since 2019, Alliance branches all over the country have been founded, including here in DC, all committed to building the united front that works towards community control of the police and campaigning for the release of political prisoners and the wrongfully convicted. So now that we've touched, a little bit on the history of the Alliance and its mission, we're going to dive into the history of policing, what is community control, and then the success of Chicago. So first off, what is community control of the police, right? It is the idea that communities should have the say on police accountabilities in their communities. It is an act of self-determination for oppressed communities. We can see today in the aftermath of the George Floyd rebellions that the police are wholly unaccountable to the people. In fact, it is the police and the FOP, that's the Fraternal Order of Police, that have power over the people because they only answer to the mayor. Community control is us expressing our democratic rights to have a say over who polices us and how we are policed, right? And to tie in a little bit to the Palestinian work going on, our PYM comrades, they talk about the actions they put on. The primary contradiction that they face is actually not Zionists and reactionaries at their actions. It is the police. The police are there at every action. They're there to intimidate. It's a show of force, right? And the only reason they can get away with that is because we don't have community control, right? There's public servants. They're supposed to serve and protect, right? We understand that that's not the role of police in a bourgeois society. So community control of the police is us basically systematically taking back our power from the police and putting it into the hands of the people. So NARPR also maintains that the struggle for community control is a decisive and strategic tactic for curtailing the violent and racist-driven repression of the Black liberation movement. Now, in our political development, it's important for us to be dialecticians and to fully understand something. We should look at its origins and transformations over time. So to fully understand community control of police, we have to look at the history of policing, and where it came from and how it's changed, but in many ways, how it has stayed the same.
Quick question.
Go for it.
What was the FOP you said?
The Fraternal Order of the Police, that's the police union.
Oh, okay.
The FOP is different from a lot of other unions in that every police officer from, beat cops all the way to the commissioner, all the levels of management are all in the union. They're all in the FOP. And the FOP really, I mean, if you ask me, it's kind of a gang, right? They protect each other no matter what. I don't know if some of you saw recently, there was a clip that came from an officer that there was an acorn that fell and he unloaded his clip into the police car.
Oh my God.
Yeah, great. He acted like he got shot. There was a suspect that he had handcuffed in the police car and he unloaded like an entire clip into the car because he thought he was shot. He resigned, but the FOP were like, well, no one got hurt. So, it's not a big deal. We can just kind of chalk this up to, nothing, basically. Wow. Yeah, crazy.
Thank you for explaining that, yeah.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about the history of policing, right? To paraphrase, one of my favorite revolutionaries, every state is a class dictatorship, which oppresses the opposing class. In bourgeois countries, the state subjugates the working and oppressed masses through the legal system and police force, which protects private property. In the US, policing emerged from slave patrols in the South and to break strikes in the North. The police used terror and violence to maintain bourgeois control by assassinating leadership, harassing activists and organizers, extorting and brutalizing the poor, etc. But let's take a moment to recall the history of community control of the police, where we saw the strongest form of community control of the police that we had in this country was back during Black Reconstruction, immediately following the Civil War. So prior to the start of the Civil War, I'm going to go into a little brief history. This also comes from one of our recommended readings that we highly, highly recommend folks to read is Frank Chapman's Marxist-Leninist Perspectives on Black Liberation and Socialism. This is a paraphrase of one of the chapters, basically. It's an incredible read. I highly recommend it. But prior to the start of the Civil War, both houses of Congress were controlled by the slaveholders' party, the Democratic Party at the time. The president and his cabinet were in full sympathy of the South. 7 out of 9 Supreme Court justices were either slaveholders or vigorous sympathizers. And all the committees of Congress were controlled by slaveholders. Through the Fugitive Slave Act and the infamous Dred Scott Supreme Court decision, which ruled that people of African descent are, quote, not included and were not intended to be included under the word citizens in the Constitution, and can therefore claim none of the rights and privileges which that instrument provides for and secures to the citizens of the United States. Slaveholders were trying their best to expand slavery and turn the US into a republic dominated by slaveholders. However, the slave uprisings led by folks like Denmark Vesey, Nat Turner, Shields Green, and John Brown prior to the Civil War transformed into a slave revolution. 200,000 former slaves were recruited into the Union Army. Yesterday's slaves were now landless peasants armed with guns, occupying the master's big house, tearing down the master's churches, etc. The political character of the revolution consisted of granting universal suffrage to freed Black men. At this time, Union troops, particularly Black regiments, and the Union Leagues, a mainly Black political organization, emerged as key forces backing Reconstruction, and they remained poised to quash counter-revolution. For almost a decade, Black people as a people had democratic community control in the Black Belt, that is, Black majority counties, over how the law was enforced and who enforced it. This can be seen as one of the earliest forms of community control, and was arguably the beginning of Black Reconstruction. But unfortunately, the Enforcement Act of 1871, otherwise known as the Klan Act, made the KKK and other similar groups illegal. Klansmen were prosecuted in federal court where juries were predominantly Black. The executive action taken by President Grant's federal troops, which significantly included Black troops, quashed the Klan, thus preventing it from violently denying the former slaves the right to vote. Now, once they were able to vote, Black people proceeded to elect their own marshals, sheriffs, and jurors. Black people policed, served, and protected themselves from the racist organized terrorism of the Klan. But unfortunately, in 1877, federal troops were ordered out of the South by President Rutherford B. Hayes as a capitulation to the former slave-owning Bourbon Democrats. Black regiments and the Union Leagues were disbanded, leaving people defenseless. Counter-revolution ensued, and by 1905, most Black people were effectively disenfranchised in every Southern state. As they lost community control, the Klan and its sympathizers in the Bourbon Democrats regained power in the South. Under a policy approved by President Lincoln, the property confiscated during the war was returned to the heirs of the Confederate owners. The Confederate rebels, who were traitors, were given by the government every opportunity to regroup and unleash a reign of terror on Black people. The rich white planters, though a minority, were able to win over to their ideals the vast majority of poor whites by promising their problems would be addressed through white unity against African Americans. This kind of clearly stated and organized racist politics set the stage for the enactment of Black codes, which was a predecessor to Jim Crow, for legalizing racism and pushing Black workers to the bottom and making them super exploited workers. Not only were they denied the right to vote, they were forced back into the cotton fields under slave-like conditions. Now, that was a brief history about Black Reconstruction. I love this quote from W.E.B. Du Bois. It says, "The slave went free, stood a brief moment in the sun, then moved back again towards slavery," right? All from a capitulation of the federal government, who, right, originally promised the freed slaves reparations. We're still waiting, right? So fast forward to 1973. Black Panther Party member Bobby Seale expressed the need to fight for community control once again. While much has changed in the 50 years since Bobby Seale spoke these words, much has stayed the same. We see in the wake of George Floyd and the BLM movement that the police continue to receive increased funding each year, increased militarized equipment, and still there is no positive effect on public safety. This is because the state, which is controlled by the racist and the capitalist, holds power over the police instead of the people holding power over the police. Let's now take a look at present-day Chicago and the victories that the Chicago Alliance has seen from their community control campaigns. So you can read a little bit. This is an infographic. Just a quick story. Myself and KB, who is the organizing co-chair of the Alliance, the Chicago Alliance had basically asked members of the Alliance all across the country to come to Chicago. They've basically been organizing the last 10 years for community control of the police. And last year they were able to pass, I forget if it was last year or the year before, but they passed a campaign called ECPS, Empowering Communities for Public Safety. Basically, I'll get into that in a little bit, I guess. I don't want to get too ahead of myself. So this last year, there were 3 instances of working class people leveraging their democratic power against the FOP and winning. So like I said, in February of 2023, myself and KB, we got to go to Chicago and help with the canvassing of neighborhoods. Basically, ECPS and these elections, what happened was the Alliance, through grassroots organizing, they would, their tactics were they tabled in oppressed communities pretty much every week at the same time, and they would just listen to people, hear how they felt about public safety, hear what the police did or didn't do. Oftentimes it was like, yeah, I heard a shooting and then I called the police and they don't come to my neighborhood, right? Or it takes them an hour and a half to come and they just write a report afterwards, right? So it's like, okay, to these people, the police don't keep them safe, right? And to other people, it's like, oh yeah, I was just walking down the street and, this known racist cop comes up, starts harassing me. you know, I talk back, and then if suddenly I'm like being arrested or brutalized, right? And so these people, they understand that what we need is power over the police. You know, we'll talk about this a little bit later also, but in DC, there are primarily three movements to solve racist policing. There's defunding the police, there's abolishing the police, and there's community control of the police. To people who uphold community control of the police, we ask, how can you defund the police or abolish the police if you don't have power over the police, right? We can ask and demand our leaders to defund or to abolish the police, but until we have actual power over them, it seems to be a pipe dream at this point. So when, I'll go back to Chicago, when ECPS was passed, there were elections to fill the seats of the district councilors, and the FOP, right? Lori Lightfoot at the time was the mayor. The Chicago Alliance had, this is also an incredible, I guess, aspect of their organization, that they never had to reach out to Lori Lightfoot. They had built a movement so large that Lori Lightfoot had to reach out to them and set up a meeting. That's people power, right? If you ask me. So they talk about ECPS, they talk about getting these police district councilors, these elections held, and to Lori Lightfoot and to the FOP, they're like, yeah, sure, let's do this. And, you know, on their side, they're like, well, we'll just fill these people with FOP sympathizers, right? Go for it.
Explain this, like what they're voting on and why.
So ECPS basically, they had pushed that there are 12 police districts, or 20, no, there's 22 police districts in Chicago. Each police district, they would put up 3 seats. These would be the police district councilors. So 66 seats in total. These police district councilors would have a slew of responsibilities and powers, basically holding the police accountable. Ideally, these people would be filled with, or these seats would be filled with people who are from working class oppressed communities that care about public safety in their community, and they want to, you know, see the police be held accountable for their actions, basically. Does that kind of answer the question? Okay.
And I'll add, just to your credit, also on the resource page, this article from Fight Back News completely outlines exactly what you're talking about. And I think the best part is, like you were saying, each district representatives could be elected to 3 seats. So it's not just like one token person that they can like lobby, right? Like it's multiple people from the community. So yeah, thank you for providing that.
No, yeah, when ECPS was passed, there were elections to fill the seats of the district councilors, and the FOP tried their hardest to get their people into those seats. But because of the diligent organizing of the Chicago Alliance, the FOP lost in a landslide. I forget the exact number, but I want to say it was like 44 out of the 66 seats were filled by working class people that were either outright trained by the Alliance or supported and endorsed by the Alliance. And this only came about because they had put in all the prep work of like organizing these communities, talking to people, and like, I know KB and I, we canvassed for one woman, her name is Kaisha Smith. She is now an elected district councilor. She was like a single mom of like 3 kids in this poor community. And she had never, you know, been involved with politics before, but the Alliance was able to train her and many other people into becoming organizers and activists, right? These people that had never dealt with politics before in their life are now holding a position of power, right, in local government. So the FOP basically lost horrifically. Working class people from Black and brown communities who had never been involved in local politics now filled those seats. And the Alliance politically trained and educated them so that they'd be able to fight against the city and the FOP and hold the police accountable. Most recently, right, this is another thing. The reason we push for community control of police is because we see the material victories that have come from this campaign, right? Again, we don't want to be dogmatists. We don't push for community control of police because it's something that people called for in the past. We push because it works, and we see that it works. We just need to put in the organizing efforts to make that happen here, right? And of course, DC faces its own unique conditions that are separate from Chicago, but in a lot of ways, there are very similar conditions in DC to what is happening in Chicago. So just to recap a quick victory that they had, most recently in December, Chicago City Council voted to reject a ruling that would have allowed the FOP to handle misconduct hearings in private arbitration. Basically, they said that because we're a union, like it was literally in their contract. They were negotiating for the new contract and they were like, before all these arbitration hearings would be held by these police district councilors, by the public. That's the whole point of these, chair positions is so that they can arbitrate over these discussions. The FOP, they were like, well, because we're a union, we should be allowed to have private arbitration. And they put that in their contract. And because of the police district councilors that were aligned with the alliance, they were able to reject that and say, no, you're not allowed to do that. They literally, from a union contract, they could get rid of that, which is powerful. That has really never been done before. The provision came straight out of the FOP contract negotiations. City Council voted 33-17 to reject the provision. It was the first time in history that the people of Chicago have been able to assert their say over any provision within the FOP contract. And this victory, again, only came about because of the Chicago Alliance's organizing and building up of the people's movement. With this being said, it's not like Chicago has full community control of the police, right? Though the contradictions are sharper than ever as the FOP loses their power. Again, to quote Frank Chapman, the executive director of DCAARPR, he says, getting CPAC, that's the Civilian Police Accountability Council, getting CPAC passed is not like a magic wand. Getting CPAC passed is creating a situation for the self-empowerment of our people. We have to be careful of that word empowerment. If you're asking the system to empower you to do something that undermines the system, then you're playing games with yourself. We're not asking the system for anything. We are demanding. We are exercising our democratic rights to say who polices our communities and how communities are policed. This shows a couple of the district council powers, but in essence, what they are shooting for is that these police district councilors have the power to hire and fire cops, If a cop has, again, they're public servants. If a cop is a known racist, a known killer cop, a known brutalizer, I mean, they have basically dictatorial rights in saying, no, this guy's gone, Not in our community. This guy doesn't get to be a policeman, They get to have a say on the budget of the police and stuff like that. They have regular meetings and town halls with communities to hear from them, hear what issues they're facing. And then they have a regular meeting with not the commissioner, but I think a couple of the captains in the FOP and basically get to grill them and be like, hey, we just heard this story from so-and-so that, your officer did this, what's the deal, What are you going to do to, rectify things, basically? Those are just a couple of the powers that they have. So from that, let's see. Does anyone have any questions before we continue? No, let's get. So I'd like to go into a couple discussion questions. I want to hear from some folks. In DC, movements for abolishing the police, defunding the police, and general police reforms are the predominant solutions to racist policing, like I said before. How does community control differ from these? I'd like to hear from anyone. No wrong answers, Please.
This is not the answer, but to me, it just is a much better message because it's much more subtle. The abolish thing just gets, the opposition just so crazy and so pissed off. And I personally am fine with it really meaning abolishing, but not saying it.
Absolutely.
Because it's just a smoother way to get your message and maybe, not have that insane backlash.
Absolutely.
It's a wonderful message.
Yeah, I mean, it's the beauty of community control is it builds this mass movement. We in the DC Alliance, we table at Anacostia metro stations every Saturday. I gotta go into our tabling interactions with the police we've had recently, but when we talk to people, about like public safety in their communities. We basically have this form that says like, how safe do you feel in your communities? Do you believe the police have a positive or negative impact? Have you been, we have like a slew of things that have you been, or have you or someone you know been victimized by the police or the legal system or the incarceral system, basically. And when we talk to people, right, abolish the police, I'm on the same page. Eventually, right, we will get there, but to the regular working class person, that is like a scary idea to them because they're like, well, without the police, you know, like I live in a dangerous neighborhood. Like, what is the police going to do? And a lot of these people, they're like, well, I see the police constantly. They're in their cars, but that's all they do. They're just sitting in their cars, right? It's like, I want the police when I call and I have an emergency that they have to be there, right? We pay them to be there, right? Our tax dollars. There's I don't know if anyone watches Seinfeld. There's a great Seinfeld bit where, you know, why don't these police officers have brooms, right? They're just standing around. It's like, literally give them something to do, right? Like, so that's why I like the idea of community control, because it also, right, it shows, it's us expressing our like right to self-determination, right, in our communities. Someone in a, you know, in the Palisades, why should they have a right to, you know, policing in a community in Anacostia, right, or across the river in Ward 7 and 8? Like, that doesn't make sense. And to the people there, when you explain it that way, it is a broad message. Overwhelmingly, the people are very receptive to the idea of community control of police. Anyone have anything else? Any other? Please.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a lot more appealing to people. Like people hear abolish and there's like almost a gut reaction to be like, wait, what about if this, and this happens, right? But I feel like community control of the police sounds democratically American, right? Like what you're saying, I shouldn't have a say in what the police do. What is this, authoritarian? Like it's almost like flipping the script.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like pointing out that we don't have, you know, power over the police, and that if we pay their tax dollars and they're public servants, supposedly they're supposed to protect and serve.
Yeah.
Well, then why don't they? Right? Why do they just brutalize and harass people? Right?
Yeah.
I'm sure most people who have gone to any action have seen, like, right, and to a lot of people, they understand that, you know, at these actions, when there are these protests, you have unarmed protesters, then the police come out fully militarized. They're like ready to bash in skulls. They're ready to bring the violence, right? But when there's a crisis situation or an emergency situation, I mean, we saw in Kansas City, the shooting that just happened, right? There's a video of like the shooter running away and regular people running and grabbing them. And then the camera literally pans over and you see a group of policemen literally standing around doing nothing, right? It's like, that alone shows that it's like, okay, the police are literally, it's just a gang, right? They intimidate people and they don't actually do what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, I was gonna add, just bringing up about how the police associations, which they call unions, are not at all what the point of unions are. Like you said, from the top down, everyone is in the union, so it has no worker power whatsoever, as if they need any more power, but it's not that. They are literal gangs, and like the LAPD in Los Angeles, where I'm from, they are, the local Black Lives Matter chapter has been like going against the police unions for years now. And now specifically, they are out there every Wednesday, like in front of the police association building, saying like, they are the ones that are allowing this to continue happening. Every case that has gone without like one look at it is because of these people in here and how much power they have and like the oversight that they say that they do in these police unions. And so I think oftentimes, yeah, like you said, it sometimes can be off-putting for like defunding or abolishing. We literally had our president say, no, we need to like invest in police when when like Black Lives Matter like kind of popped off, and then he got into office and was like, no, we literally need to like fund them more. And so there's like more money being poured into it. So using not only the branding, but literally this just being like possibly a better tactic could be more effective. But the only thing that I think is how different it is specifically for DC, because maybe issues with like statehood, right? Like how many different types of police you have in DC is also an issue. So how could community control over the police be be something that would be like overarching for the DC area, because you have federal agents, you've got like military, you've got like so many different types of like what we consider like police, you know?
Absolutely. I think this is like a very important question that we tackle with, like, in the Alliance, we see DC statehood and community control as like interlinked, right? They are both campaigns for the right to self-determination, to like express our democratic rights to have a say over our lives, right? This is not the Alliance's line, but to me personally, like, if we get to a point where, years, we build up a mass movement for community control of the police, and we push forward like a bill or some type of legislation, and we have all these working people behind this, regular people, and Congress comes in and shuts it down, like we've seen them do time and time again. That is like a moment for these people to understand that it's like, you are not allowed to express your democratic rights. We do not live in a democracy here in DC. And I mean, in this country, if you're asking me correctly, right? But, and that's like a moment of, a heightening of political consciousness for a lot of people.
No, exactly. I think in many ways, it's like, I mean, it's laundering socialism for like progressive white people who can be moved,
Yeah,
but who are scared of some of those words and ideas.
definitely. And, sorry, go for it. No, please, go for it.
I just wanted to, it's a slightly different
Go for
tax, but one of the nice things about like talking about how does community control differ from these is that again, like in the United States, we're often very like focused internally, but like when you talk about community control of policing, you can actually point to international models where that has like happened before, and if it's had like real effects on the society that it's in, when there's like higher degrees of police control of the police by the population, whereas there aren't a good number, there aren't societies out in the world you can point to that have abolished the police, even existing socialist countries at a certain point to defend the revolution absolutely needed state control. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I heard some folks talking earlier about China, and I look at Cuba also, right? It's like they have police, but the duties and accountability of the police to the people is radically different than what we have in our country, right? And so community control of the police is a step to achieving that, right?
I was wondering how community safety alternatives to police fit in.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we talk a lot about restorative justice and stuff like that. And part of community control of the police is to show people that in your communities, if you feel like the police are a net negative, that all they do is brutalize and harm your people, you should have the right to say, well, we don't want that. We want, an alternative. We want like an evidence-backed practice that actually works to solve, crime, right? Instead of punishing crime, we should solve the root of crime, right? Of course, I want to defund the police, right? They get immense amounts of money from the government, from our taxpayer dollars, right? That money can be used to, solve the things that actually bring about crime, right? And if you ask me, the number one crisis in DC right now is the housing crisis and gentrification, right? One, who enforces that? The police, right? And think about all the money that come from the police that could go into affordable housing, right? And keeping DC natives in the city instead of pushing them out, right, across the river. And now even, when we table in Anacostia, we see it's like actively being gentrified, right? Like these people have nowhere to go. They're getting pushed out, and having community control of the police, having the say over your community and what gets done, community control of the police is a step into empowering people to demand from the system what they need, right? It's not like you're asking for that, right? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think a little bit too about like community safety also comes back to kind of what you were talking about, a possible approach that doesn't lead to escalating, which is like de-escalation tactics,
Yeah.
right? Like having more social workers, having more people that are of the community, right? Not living in other communities and then coming in only when like something happens, right? Because oftentimes, like you said, they're only called when possibly something's happening, or they're already policing the same areas anyway, so they're like either creating a problem or making it worse. And so like having people that are actually in that community to de-escalate and figure out more of the root causes instead of, yeah, just coming as reactionary people or reactionary tactics being used.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, if someone's having like a mental health crisis, right? The police are there and they bring the violence, right? Most times. If a community has community control of the police, they can say, well, you know, when a mental health crisis happens, we don't want the police there. We want social workers to come. Like they have that power to be able to do that. But they right now, without community control of the police are like, screw you, right? I don't care what you say, I'm going there, right? And I'm going to like make sure I deal with this in whatever way I see fit. And usually that's the brutalization or arrest of someone experiencing a crisis, right? Go for it.
So DC already has existing like oversight boards, like for transit police and I think MPD as well. And they also have in each police district that exists like these public forums that people could attend to complain about whatever. But the problem with that, which you're well aware of, is that, you know, the police basically have full control over the entire process.
Yeah.
And it basically just runs like a soundboard for the community, which nothing really happens.
Right.
So, but how do we exploit what exists as an institution to get policy introduced and passed, or at least build a movement around or a campaign around to reform or build something new that could remove the power of the police in DC and basically reorient it towards the community where like those institutions could exist, but it's actually flipped on its head where the community actually would set policy as opposed to the police.
Yeah, I think that's like in a couple other cities, they also have these civilian police accountability councils, but they are either beholden to the FOP or they have really no power. We have comrades in Florida. It's actually written into their state legislature that like community control of the police is not possible, that they can't have that, right? We don't have that here. With what you're talking about with existing like town halls and stuff that the MPD puts on, we definitely, right, we're in like the beginning stages of the alliance here. We're building up our capacity. Eventually we want to like be at those meetings. That's what the Chicago Alliance did. Once they built up their numbers, they would go to those meetings and they would agitate, right? They would show it's like, hey, what's going on here? Like we're coming up every week, every month, we're giving our grievances and nothing is happening, right? They're pointing out the weaknesses of the existing system. And either what has to happen is that the people in charge either have to concede and reconcile with that, or they, you know, push back and say, well, yeah, you know, things are the way they are. And that allows for, you know, different avenues. And the DC Alliance, we're talking about holding like people's hearings. That's something they did in Chicago as well, is once you have embedded yourself in a community and people trust you and you have, you know, a network of people that believe in the Alliance's work, you basically hold these people's hearings and people come together and, you know, talk about their experiences with the police. And we decide from there, you know, what we do, right? That has no oversight from the FOP. That has no oversight from police. I hope that kind of answers your question. It's part of it is, you know, like we definitely have to work within the systems that already exist. Part of it is we have to build up our capacity to engage in like multiple areas of work before we can do that.
Hi, so this is related and a little unrelated.
Yeah.
So I was reading recently that DC has these like stabilization centers where homeless people or those that are suspected of addiction are brought, and the center is staffed by former addicts or people that have a greater knowledge of what they're going through. And this is something different than what used to be. So, I mean, That's not exactly, well, it's more of a de-escalation way of treating, this problem than the way it was treated. And I don't really know how successful it is, but if it is, it seems like it maybe could be used as an example of something that is in place that works, and where those people that are more community related to the problem are in effect having more control over it. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a little bit of a leap, but
No, I think that's like a perfect example, right? The Alliance wants regular working class people that have been oppressed by the police. Those are the people, I mean, Dante was also there in Chicago when we went to the National Alliance Conference, the 50th anniversary. They had a session basically where they had Alliance chapters from all over the country, brought a total of 50 families, I believe, that were victims of, police crimes, basically. And these families, like the Alliance, we say that activists and organizers, we're like the backbone of the Alliance. But these families and these people who are affected by police crimes, they're like the fuel. Because when you talk to these people, they're like, yeah, this happened to my daughter, this happened to my son, this happened to my dad, whatever. And they say, now, till the moment I die, I'm making sure that this doesn't happen to anyone else, right? Those are the people that need to be leading these movements. And the Alliance is able to take those people, connect to them, and turn them into activists and organizers. So it's a really good example. It's like people who are most affected by it should be the ones leading these movements, really. Yeah.
The crime isn't gonna happen if you don't have somebody, doing drugs in this street or doing it or whatever.
Yeah.
Preventative measures.
Definitely.
I think like one of the things to think about with reforms like that is like the difference between reformist reforms and non-reformist reforms. One of the things that happened, I canvassed also in Chicago. I was living there until 2019, one of the things that the Alliance and all of the organizations rejected, both Brom and Lori Lightfoot had proposed like police accountability councils, both, and they were always rejected by the Alliance because they didn't have the one major thing that you needed, which is hiring firepower over police officers that would abuse people. And so a lot of people were like, well, they're giving you 99% of what you want, so why don't you take this, and you have to like build the power to be able to say no to reformist reforms, because the argument from the Alliance was that the second that you put something in place like what DC has, people are like, oh, thank God we solved this problem,
Absolutely.
what I mean? And now it demobilizes a lot of people. I think something that we can all think about is like how there was such a push in the country for like healthcare reform, and then we got Obamacare, and now everybody tells you, no, we solved that problem. And for anybody who's been on Obamacare or experienced poverty, let me tell you, fuck Obamacare. So,
No,
yeah.
absolutely. And to that and to Dante's earlier point, also like I guess, beauty of the Alliance is that, right, it is led by the working and oppressed masses that are politically conscious. We are not here to compromise with the system. We know what we want. We know what we are demanding. When you have, liberals or rightists or whatever that, are willing to push for the reform and then they compromise and get a watered down version of that reform, they see it as a success, right? We do not see that as a success. What we see as a success is power in our hands. That is what we will settle for. That's not to say the Chicago Alliance hasn't made, hasn't had to have concessions when they, pushed for their legislation. They did, but they got as much as they were able to get, right? They took as much as they were able to get. They didn't they would fight tooth and nail basically for the most powerful parts of their reform, basically. Anyone else? No, we can go to the next one. Nice. So what is the importance of having a mass defense organization committed to fighting against political repression? Any takers?
It's kind of with the distinction between funding, abolishing, and community control, how you handle that baggage that is associated with those terms. I think having that separate organization gives that same effect where, you know, there are a lot of organizations, socialist, communist organizations that call for similar things, but those typically have baggage that a lot of people aren't comfortable with. So having that mass organization that's dedicated specifically there kind of eliminates or partially eliminates that issue.
Absolutely. Go for it.
I mean, the point of a mass organization is that you're able to mobilize people who are traditionally outside of the left.
Yeah.
So by having a mass organization, the goal is to mobilize masses of people. And for looking at other mass defense type organizations, even if some people have different opinions about them, you can clearly see that they were successfully able to do that, like the NAACP, for instance. I know there's a lot of people who have a lot of opinions about the NAACP, but to be quite honest, that is probably the largest national mass defense organization committed to fighting against like racist repression. So if we're trying to build a similar type organization, then obviously, right, we want it to be a little bit more progressive in its orientation. It makes sense that we are trying to get involved in those struggles so that we can start like recruiting people and building a base and having like networks of people that we can then leverage.
Absolutely, right. In the Alliance, we talk a lot about, and we'll talk about this with the United Front as well, but we don't care, not that we don't care. We put less importance on the unity of thought. What we care about is the unity of action, right? We are trying to, like you said, mobilize people that are otherwise outside the, politicized, life and that we are engaged in, right? A lot of us. I don't know, who here has heard of the Tampa Five? Handful, nice. So for those who don't know, the Tampa Five were a group of 5 protesters. It was 3 students, 1 campus worker, and 1 organizer at the University of South Florida. This was right when Ron DeSantis had signed in those racist DEI bills. Basically, there was a number of things, but primarily it was saying that colleges and universities and even some high schools that had, programs and classes around, African-American studies, gender studies, anything Ron DeSantis would claim as the woke mob or whatever, right? Any college or university that has those classes are no longer receiving state funding, basically erasing those classes from the curriculum of universities in Florida. So these protesters went to the president's office and demanded a meeting. Within 5 minutes, the university police was called, and you should see some of the videos. They were brutal. They tackled these women, they brutalized them, they groped them, and arrested them. But the beauty was that because the Alliance and SDS also took up their struggle, within the day of them getting arrested, there were calls from all over the country that allowed them to be freed hours before they were originally meant to. And in the months after, the Alliance took up their campaign as a campaign to fight political repression, right? They were being politically repressed. The university charged them with 5 years in prison. The kicker is that the university then gathered them up and said, okay, listen, we'll drop all the charges if you apologize to the police. And they were like, fuck that, no way, right? And so the university then said, well, if you're not gonna apologize, now it's 10 years. They raised the charges because they didn't get an apology. That's insane to me, that's wild. But that didn't deter them. They then, through the Alliance and through the SDS and other organizations, they were able to mobilize nationwide actions, call-ins, all this stuff. They went on a national speaking tour. And for months, they had a people's lawyer. It was incredible what they did. And they were able to go out to regular people and say, look what happened to me, right? That shows you we're being politically repressed. It's me now, it could be you next, right? This is supposedly our democratic right. to organize, to protest, to gather, to demonstrate, and we're being repressed by the university police. Like, this shouldn't be allowed. And then in December of last year, just a couple months ago, a week before their trial date, because of the mass mobilizations, because of the call-ins from people all across the country, the charges were dropped, right? For a number of reasons. One, the university saw that they had no leg to stand on, right? And they'll draw it out until the very end because they want them to, spend the time, energy, money it takes into fighting back, right? But because of the organized movement of the alliance to fight against political repression, right, we were able to take that on. I think at the last, at the 50th anniversary conference, we also pushed a resolution to fight for the Cop City 61, I believe it is. The 61 organizers that are being indicted on the RICO charges for the bail fund. Like, we see, right, that as contradictions sharpen, the state has to come down with political repression, and we need to be organized to fight against it. They're organized, we need to be organized, right? Anyone have anything else? Go for it.
I just also, just in terms of like, looking back, without organizations like the ILD in the South, which I think there's a reading group next week. Plug Cameron Ho talks a lot about like the 1920s in the South that like cataloged all of the like lynchings that were happening and like defended people that had been accused falsely of rape and things like that. And without organizations like the Panthers in the 70s and other organizations that have been about communal defense, there's so many cases of this that we would just never know about, because like at the end of the day, 90% of the time, the police are brutalizing people who have no ability to fight back or even document their situation otherwise in a way that can even like reach an audience.
Totally, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it shows the importance of why the Alliance took up what it is. And, we, like I said, our campaign, one of our campaigns is for community control of the police, but we also see the dire need and importance, just like, the communists and socialists in the 1900s saw with the need for the Alliance to fight against political repression and to free the wrongfully incarcerated and political prisoners, right? Anyone else have anything on that point? Perfect. I love our discussion. So our next question, what steps should the DC Alliance take in making community control a popular idea for working class and oppressed people here in DC? We can talk a little bit about what we do currently. So like I said, we table in Anacostia metro stations pretty much every Saturday. Just a little story about that, of what's been happening. We started tabling a couple months ago, and we had our table with our DCAARPR banner, and then we had another table where we were handing out prepackaged food and water for free. And for a couple weeks, it was totally fine. The Metro Transit Police were constantly watching us, staring us down, but there was no issues. And we had incredible engagement from the people. I mean, there are so many people that are like, hey, I don't have like money to buy groceries. Can I take like, lines? Like, we have so much to spare. Yes, please, like, take. And meanwhile, we're talking to them about like, community control. They see the police that are like intimidating us while we're tabling, and they're like, hey, why aren't they actually solving or stopping crime in your neighborhoods? Why are they here doing this, right? And a couple weeks pass, we eventually get into encounter with Metro Police, and again, it is up to that individual police officer to enforce, right, whatever they want to enforce. And at that point, that police officer just had it out for us and said, hey, you can't serve food and water and drinks here. Even if it's free, pre-packaged. It's not like we're making food and handing it out or anything like that. And so we resisted for a little bit, but then eventually we were like, okay, let's see how it does without food and water. So we didn't have any food and water. We just had the table and the banner. We still had good engagement. Engagement dipped a little bit, but overall, we were still talking to a lot of people. They see the banner, stop police crimes, stop killer cops, justice for all political prisoners. And people love that. They come right up to the table and they want to talk to us, and maybe a 2-hour tabling session. We will talk to probably at least 100 people. It is like a high traffic area and we sit right by the entrance. And so people are constantly coming up to us and talking. Then maybe a couple weeks ago, we tabled in the same spot we always do. It's been probably 15, it was like our 15th tabling session basically. And a Metro Transit police officer comes out of the gates and he's like, hey, y'all gotta move, like, basically, I don't know if anyone's been to Anacostia Metro Station, but it's like a long wall. There's like the entrance here. We like prop up in this corner. He told us, you can't be here, you're blocking the entrance. Entrance is completely free for passerbys to go. We're not blocking it at all. He says, you gotta move all the way down the wall, probably like 50 feet away. And I was like, you know, we're not blocking the entrance, why do we gotta do this? And he basically was like, oh, you don't understand me? Are you like stupid, all this stuff? Like really just harassing us. And we get into like a little argument for a little bit, but eventually, you know, we move maybe 10 feet and we're clearly not even close to the entrance. And he's like, nah, I need you guys to be like all the way down. And it's like at that point, when we moved all the way down eventually, no one's coming up to us, right? Our engagement dropped dramatically because, right, one, people can barely see the banner. And they're just like, oh, people are just tabling over there. I'm not like interested or worried about it, right? And so right now we're figuring out if we want to start a campaign to resist this, or if we move our tabling location. We like tabling at metro stations because it's such high traffic and we get a lot of responses from people from primarily Ward 7 and 8, but even people from other wards that are traveling through for work or whatever reason. So yeah, that's the like consistent work that we do. We also get involved in solidarity work with our alliance partners, like PYM. Right now, I know there's a march going on, I think, in a little bit. But we work with them, you know, we understand the need for a united front, right? And we'll talk about this a little bit later as well, but right, all of these struggles are connected. We see that as socialists and communists. We understand that these struggles are connected. We understand that organization is important. Now that people are in these organizations that are committed to their struggles, we understand that now these organizations need to be organized into a united front, into the alliance, right? So that we can all be committed to, you know, uplifting each other and, you know, working on each other's, you know, campaigns and the struggles that they're in, and, you know, raise the political consciousness of their members, of our members, and showing the importance of their struggles and our struggles, and, you know, really unifying and combining ourselves into, you know, a united front. But yeah, does anyone have any ideas? Please.
To tie this one back to your first question, what is like the result of your outreach to organizations that are committed to abolition or defunding been like? Are they willing to like become part of communal actions and things like that, or what has been the pushback from them?
Definitely, I think so. Our primary abolition group we work with is Harriet's Wildest Dreams, and they like the idea of community control. They are willing to work with us, but it is like a mixture of different things in their capacity to be able to do their work and also contribute to our work. And this is what we're seeing across the board from our steering committee organizations, is like people have signed on that they want to be a partner with the Alliance, but right, what we ask is now each organization basically give us 1 or 2 members that is committed to the Alliance work, and whatever we have, they can basically, it's like a network, right? They can bring Alliance work back to their organizations, and it's like a very efficient way of doing it. But the pushback from abolition groups is, I mean, also Harriet's Wildest Dreams, all love to them, but you know, they are maybe against being a part of a organization that is, you know, nationally centered and nationally structured. You know, the National Alliance does, you know, not give us demands, but calls for, days of actions, weeks of actions. When the Tampa 5 case was going on, they would say like, we need to put on these events. And a lot of people, they're like, especially here in DC, something we were seeing is that these organizations are like, well, why do we need to like basically follow what the National Alliance is saying? We need to figure out, what's working, what's happening here in DC, and like worry about that first as a first priority. And that doesn't really work with our mission. We are a centralized organization, and we do work incredibly closely with, the local going-ons, but it is also important for us to take on a national character and like amplify and demonstrate for cases that are happening across the country. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it doesn't seem, it's not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, exactly.
But on the thing where you have to move your table, it's just completely arbitrary. And maybe, I don't know, are there rules? I mean, can you go to Metro? It would be nice if we're like prepared to say, no, you don't have the authority because here's what the rules say and here's where we can be. And just say no. I mean, I'm sorry, but you can't, you need to have some authority to do this. And so, experience that. And if there are rules, and if there aren't, kind of screwed. But I mean, you think that there are some. I mean, where's the rule that says you can't have prepackaged food? And I know it's gonna piss them off or whatever, but it's still, you're a rule imposer. You have to go by the rules too.
Definitely. And we did some research, and it is to table, we need to get a permit from the local DC government. And that permit costs, they say it costs $100, but it's actually up to $2,000 for a year. And that's just a table, not to hand out food and water. But the real issue is like, right, it is up to the police whether or not they want to enforce this. There are other people that table that they don't care about because it's not like a political message, right? It's not anti-cop, right?
Yeah.
And for the most part, they don't care about that. But they choose to enforce this when it's us. And it's not every cop, but there are, some that for whatever reason, they take it up that day that, hey, this can't happen, right? And so we're trying to figure out what we want to do that. And it's like also, if we didn't have a table, if it was just us with clipboards, that would be fine. But it's just the fact that we have a table is what, gets us in trouble.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think it kind of speaks to maybe some of the differences about just going against like racist oppression versus having that political repression piece. Because what you are doing is political, right? Like you are making a political statement that you do not agree with the politics of the state, like the way in which the state is used to oppress people and to repress our ability to literally just speak to our community members is in direct conflict with what they're doing, right? And so I think just going back to your question about what should be done, I mean, it's a little bit tough with what you're saying to try and follow like the rules because we know, yeah, like you said, that the rules will be used however they interpret them. But I do think that going to places like the Metro is probably going to be one of the most effective, just because if you are using public transit, you are already in somewhat agreement that like community spaces and like community should be something of worth that's worth value and that we should like, somehow make that more accessible. So that would be one thing that I would say. But also I think just going back to your point about the United Front, like, as you said, you're still going to have partners who may have different like goals in mind in the short term, but that doesn't mean that strike it has to like diminish the way that you work together. And so I think if in any ways that you're able to create like a mass movement, it's going to have a net positive because the more regular folk that may not have like political alignment in a group, the more that they can see those groups working together, whether they know the ins and outs of like the points that was brought up by Tim, who just walked out, but whether they know those internal things, they can still see that there's like that united piece that says like, we can still work together, whether or not we have, the same political ideologies.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, this kind of goes more back to point two, but I think that whole issue with tabling kind of sheds a light on the importance of having a mass organization. Because like if you have broad outreach and a lot of connections, you're more likely to know someone who maybe knows the law or can fundraise or something, and it's like. And that really can help facilitate things like that to happen, you know.
Absolutely. I mean, a perfect example at our last GBM, one of our community members that we met during tabling, his name's Pastor Mike. He is really engaged with local politics. And he was like, oh, if MPD is harassing you, you write to me. I know like the local attorney general and he can like help out, right? It's like, that is immediately, it's like, oh, okay, so the answer is we need to embed ourselves in the communities, find people that are able to like, you know, help us out, right? That align with our mission. It is unfortunate that it's Metro Transit Police, so they don't have power over that, but.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, or just add, I mean, you know, there's a whole, which everyone is most probably aware of, like, there's gun violence in DC, and it's particularly rooted in, well, not really rooted, but it's concentrated in East River, you know, Ward 7 and 8, and you know, those are like typically the communities that are primarily heavily occupied by the police in DC, and have been the communities that are targeted for gentrification or have been gentrified to East River from historic communities in DC. But you know, there's a lot of anti-gun violence groups or Black youth groups that have been trying to address the issues of gun violence that obviously affects young people, particularly Black youth, like Trigger Projects and you know, Black Swan Academy. There's a bunch of other groups, and there's also the churches, the Black Christian churches. You know, there's a campaign ran by a church friend next door to me. They call it Bible Over Guns, and it's Black churches that are leading these sort of efforts to get Black youth, you know, obviously it's the churches, which, you know, there's contradictions there, but regardless, like, it's a tactic that, you know, progressive Black folks use and have historically used to get their youth out of crime or whatever petty shit they're involved with. Because, you know, the mayor's budget every year has, like, you know, cut back on certain programs that affects youth. And this is why you see the direct link between childhood poverty and youth crime. And this is why, like, you know, folks should be supporting like this child tax credit that's being pushed through, even though it's not the strongest, but something, and be really working with, you know, working class parents that, you know, probably work 2 or 3 jobs to probably get by, to pay rents and take care of the kids. You know, we work with the recreation centers to develop programs for youth. They're really trying to tap into those youth issues because a lot of folks that care about the police are afraid by these slogans of defund and abolish. You know, they want the police to respond to these issues. But a lot of them also know the reasons why these issues occur is because of, you know, lack of resources for their communities and their kids. So how do we, you know, develop alliances with these Black-led, and a lot more women-led actually, or church-led anti-gun violence groups, and related to struggle over the police or, you know, the state or whatever you want to call it, you know, political power to, and it is related to statehood too, right? Like, how do we stop the guns flowing into DC, which is a statehood question? And then 2, how do we, you know, have more control over the policy of public safety in our communities and the resources flowing into our communities? And then 3, you know, and then, you know, how do we support our youth and give them jobs, right? And stop childhood poverty. So I think all these 3 things are completely linked, and the alliance should be, you know, supplementing and also in direct struggle with these communities, doing these, fighting for these legislative policies, and also building a campaign along with them, because that's how you insert, you know, this thing every time you're struggling with people, like CPAC, or some, whatever the slogan's gonna be. And that becomes like a component of what they're fighting for. And then eventually you have a broad ass campaign that's gonna be in the churches, be in the small businesses, be in the barbershops, blah, 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 blah. And then shit just builds. And then it just becomes like a sort of domino effect, but you know, quantitative, qualitative change type of thing, you know, so.
Absolutely. I think like that's a great point, right? Now, right, we are at a stage of development in the DC Alliance that we are building our numbers. And Dante is actually part of the local conference planning committee that will hopefully happen this year. And we want that to be kind of a jumping off point for our steering committee organizations to come back into Alliance work. And we want to use that as a time for all the community members that we have met and come into contact with. Like there are now, I mean, even just however many months we've been doing it, we now have people that recognize us, that we know, like on a name by name basis. They come up to us, they're like, oh, you know, we'd love to see you guys out here again. You're really doing great work. Like keep it up, right? Which makes us not want to leave our Metro Transit spot. But as we build out our numbers, right, we can then engage in various strategies or various ways of like connecting to other organizations. Correct? We don't want to start from scratch. There are other organizations that are, you know, our mission and their mission is like linked together, and we just need to like form that connection. But that is like something that we eventually want to do. Absolutely. Anyone else for any of these questions?
Yeah, I really liked what Dante said, because I feel like there's, when talking about like engaging with working class and oppressed people in DC or elsewhere, I think we have to talk about the youth, and we have to talk about how to engage people and build them up politically, especially people who, you know, might work long hours or have children they have to take care of. And I really like how at the beginning you talked about the woman who is the single mom in Chicago who was empowered to run for political office, because that's so important. I feel like a lot of times in spaces like this, it tends to be a lot of young people who are like maybe in school or something, and that's great. But once you get into adulthood and you maybe have a family or you have a full-time job, it's like it gets a lot harder to make those time commitments. And that's another reason why you need a lot of people to spread out tasks and, you know, yeah.
Absolutely. No, you're so right.
I work for Black Swan, so like I'm able to kind of see like some of the things that they do that are kind of like effective for like engaging with like youth and like community like kind of broadly. And like one of the things that I think is like really, really important, especially for like grassroots organizations, is like if you're trying to like work with working class youth, you need the ability to like pay these people for their time, because these people are not just going to participate in organizations, even if they are of the cause, because these people have material realities that inevitably structure and like limit their ability to participate and get involved with things like this. So, you know, having the ability to pay young people for their work is like one of the best ways to be able to like actually make sure that they're able to participate. Because like for my job, if we're having some like, you know, testimony hearing that we like want young people to turn out for or something like that, like one of the best ways that we are able to like have young people turn out is like by offering like stipends and stuff. So I think being able to apply for like programs and having like a budget that you could leverage in that way is going to be like really important for like engaging with those type of.
Absolutely. This last year, we applied for the Diverse City Fund, and we actually got our 15K grant money, which is really nice. We're going to apply for it again this year, but definitely, and we have a budget allotted for a lot of things, but we want a portion of that definitely to go to people to help like any type of organizing activity, like, and the one that comes to the forefront that we had put as an example was if we need people to canvas, we'd want, you know, young Black and brown people, we don't want to pay them to go do these kinds of things, right? Not only because it's, you know, right to, you know, pay them for the labor that they're doing, but also, like you said, their material needs, right? They need to have some kind of, not incentive, but kind of, to be able to do this.
Marion Barry Summer Employment Program that you all should apply for now.
Summer employment program?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So that hires you, and the Lions can apply to be a sponsoring organization, and the city pays them. So you guys can.
Huh, sick, okay, thank you.
I think it's also not just like direct compensation, but you also have to think about needs like childcare and transportation that comes up for people, because you can pay someone to show up and testify, but if they have 2 kids and those kids are, you know, maybe can't go to a courtroom because they're really young, like you need someone to watch those kids. So it's like, that's another thing. You have to like think about all these different factors that kind of hold people back from organizing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, any event we put on, a political education or general body meeting, we have childcare and food and snacks and all that stuff provided. Because a lot of the people, I mean, RB is one of our organizing co-chairs. She's a member of PACA, right? She's a mom. She has all these kids. She has a lot of work she has to do. We have another member, Gustavo, who is a dad, right? They are people who are committed to doing work, but they need the help, right? And part of that comes from, again, building up our numbers so that we have people that are capable of doing the work. That's the kind of the whole thing is we see all the work that needs to be done. Now we just need, and we have work to plug people in. We just need the people to help basically do the work now. Anyone have anything else? I think this is gonna be our two closing out discussion questions. We talked a little bit about this already, so we don't have to go too much into it, but basically, what is the meaning and importance of the United Front? Can anyone give me an answer? Who here has heard of the term the United Front? All right. Anyone have what their definition of a United Front is? Please.
So like, I understand the concept of the United Front, like most notably from like Georgi Dimitrov, who was like actually like a Bulgarian communist theorist who, due to him being in Bulgaria, was like intimately familiar with Nazism and fascism. And so this is a person who actually like was forced to like defend himself in front of like the Nazi judiciary after the fire that happened at the Reichstag, which was used by the fascists in Germany as a way to say these communists are violent insurrectionists, so we need to crack down on them now. Used to like illegalize and like decimate the German Communist Party and like related communist parties throughout Central and Eastern Europe. But obviously, right, not just the communist parties, which is something that Georgi Dimitrov is talking about in his concept of the United Front, because he's pointing out how when the fascists are trying to come to power, they are attacking a wide strata of the population. They are coming after working class people. They are coming after people who a lot of us would consider middle class. They're coming after a broad array of progressive and democratic forces. So the United Front is technically like the term that's used to describe the need to unite these anti-fascists, these anti-racist, these progressive and pro-democratic political forces into a coherent like political coalition that's able to fight against fascism and other forms of political reaction.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I think like I mean pertinent United Front topic. If you look at the Palestinian resistance and all its factions, right, they may not all agree on their ideologies, but they are united in action. They are united in, fighting against the Zionist occupation, right? We see that, again, at the 50th conference, there are a number of progressive groups that are all, they all have their own struggles, but they're united in action for community control of the police and to act as a mass defense organization against political repression, because those two campaigns help everyone. It helps all of these organizations that are committed to, various degrees of, liberation or, progressive politics. And for us, we say we'll work with anyone. We don't work with fascists. We don't work with reactionaries, but anyone who is able to take up, the alliance's cause, we will work with. And, Dante mentioned earlier, the faith organizations, there's a contradiction there, but in the Chicago Alliance, they have a huge partnership with faith-based organizations. And it's like, right, I always think every idea stamped the brand of a class. Religious communities can be reactionary, but they can also be progressive. And so we shouldn't isolate people just based on that. We should look to see who is united in our cause and work with them and, struggle. Are, a big part of the Alliance is uniting these people, struggling together, and then coming out united, even more united than you were before, right? We're not like trying to, I guess, push like certain lines on people or anything like that. We want to struggle democratically together. And it's like, there will be times where there's contention, there is, disagreement on tactics and strategies and what to do. But it's important for us to do that in like a principled way so that we can come out united and, continue our work.
And I think anecdotally, I've thought about this a little bit in terms of I really noticed this during the two big Palestinian protests, the big giant DC ones, right? Because the first one was led, I'm pretty sure that was PSL. And the second one, I don't know who ran it, but it was just a bunch of libs saying not a whole lot. But one of the things I found most interesting was like there was no concept in the second one of community protection. There was no, during the first, if anybody was at the first DC one, at multiple, like it was a constant theme throughout that protest was make room for people. The medics are coming through. Who keeps us safe? We keep us safe. Not one chant of who keeps us safe, we keep us safe. Not one mention of collective solidarity with the medics, with the people who were trying to pile in. Like it was just a completely absent concept from the second rally, and it was just like very like so interesting and obvious to me. And I was pointing it out to a couple of my more liberal friends who had shown up for the second one. Like, I wish you could have seen the first one and like understand this fundamental difference with like a united front, like solidarity, like we are here for each other and we keep us safe. And I think that's inherent to a left-wing perspective.
Definitely, yeah. And it's like, right, United Front, as we've seen throughout history in various United Fronts, as conditions change, as progress happens and develops, the United Front will change, right? Through the struggle for different victories or defeats, you will come out united in different ways. But we see that every win we get, maybe we win a couple things, and then suddenly the more rightist or liberal factions of the alliance will be like, okay, and that's enough. But the progressive, socialist, communist leaders in the alliance are going to say, well, either you're with us or you're not, right? You can go do your own thing, and we will stay committed to, our mission for liberation for all oppressed people, right?
So the more you succeed, the bigger the united front, and the more you're gonna get those people that have the backlash, that are gonna do the wedge, and they're gonna find ways to get in. And you have to know that and be prepared, because there have been so many times where a big united front has been just completely decimated from even a small thing. I mean, there are, again, you've got massive opposition with lots of money and lots of the access to how to tear these people down. And so it's so many times it's just lack of preparedness or lack of knowing how to respond. And if you don't know how, and if you don't do it quickly, it can just fall apart. And so the more successful you are, the more likely you're gonna get slammed. And these people know what they're doing, and they have the resources to do that.
Absolutely. In Chicago, that's something they deal with on a constant basis. They work with a lot of NGOs and nonprofits, and they can always try to derail the alliance. They try to drive a wedge between these organizations. They do whatever they can to co-opt the movement. But because the alliance is led by the politically conscious, socialists and communists, people who are oppressed, they understand it's like, we are not here to compromise with, the nonprofits, with the liberals, with the wedge drivers, right? It is important for us to drive these movements and not basically concede any power, really, to them.
Yeah, that was actually something I've been thinking about this whole talk, and I wanted to ask about was like, how do you avoid the liberalification of your organization to stop it from being defanged and turned into an NGO?
Absolutely. I think, sorry, did you have a response to that?
I mean, yeah.
Go for it, please.
I think honestly, like one of the biggest problems with building a united front for nation is the fact that like historically, the relationship between like liberals and like leftists has always been kind of strained from both sides.
Yeah.
Which is really important to acknowledge because we talk a lot, right, about the danger of liberalification or whatever. But very rarely do we ever sort of acknowledge the very real danger of left sectarianism. So the tendency of some people on the left to not want to work with these progressive elements, who we would consider in the liberal constituency around the issues of the day, which is a very real question. It's a question of struggle, it's a question of unity, and to be quite honest, I mean, I don't think anyone has the answer, but at the end of the day, when you're talking about how the alliance puts emphasis on unity of action versus unity of thought, I think that's the most concrete example I can think of, you know?
Yeah.
It's like if we're trying to build an alliance for community control police in DC, that alliance is probably gonna involve some forces who some of us probably don't like in certain issues, but we're gonna have to pick and choose what issues we decide to struggle on at a particular moment.
Yeah.
With the ultimate goal of, right, trying to move the struggle from one stage to the next.
Absolutely. And I think that's a perfect answer, right? The whole point of the alliance also is to fight against sectarianism, right? There are all these groups and we see, I won't tell it, I won't, you know, shit on other organizations or whatever, but, right, part of the United Front is fighting against that sectarianism. It's like, we can all be in our organizations, have our political line, have, you know, follow our organization's like principles. But when you're doing the alliance work, we are committed to our United Front and the work that we are doing, right? We are putting our sectarian ideas behind us, and it's not involved in the alliance. It's like, you can do that in your own organizing with your own group. But in the alliance, we're committed to the United Front, working together for unity of action, so. Anyone else? If not, we can go to, and we again kind of touched on this, but how can the United Front be used in the struggle against racism and oppression? Anyone? Any takers?
I think that off of what Aaron was talking, I mean, if we're looking at this from like a purely objective material perspective, the left alone cannot accomplish really any of these tasks that it's laid out. You know, if we're talking about like engaging the working class, the majority of the working class is liberals. It's, you know, the liberal, kind of progressive adjacent constituencies, that are largely, you know, either apolitical or independent or concentrated within the base of the Democratic Party. And so the role of the United Front is to form a kind of coalitional basis to mobilize those constituencies. I mean, if you want the masses of the people to be involved and engaged in political struggle, you have to form a kind of political organization and a political orientation that can actually mobilize those groups. And part of that is the United Front or the Popular Front or, you know, People's Front, whatever you want to call it. And I think that that's kind of the perspective we have to have as people who are trying to look at this from like a scientific outlook, is if you want these people to be politically engaged, you have to create a basis in which they can actually engage in that political activities. And the majority of these people are not going to join your Communist Party. They're not going to join your Socialist Party. The majority of the people just want a kind of organizational basis to achieve the things that they need. Or they see eye to eye with you about the struggle against fascism or about the struggle against repression. And so that's going to have to include, you're going to have to build a front that can include small business owners. You're going to have to build a front that can include religious groups, that can, you know, include to some extent, you know, these kinds of nonprofits, groups, because that not only brings resources, it brings the masses of people involved, it brings more people, it brings more of an ability to actually mobilize, because when you have this kind of extent of political repression as we're seeing this kind of rise in the fascist like threat of you know, the kind of overthrow of any kind of democratic basis of governance, even if that is already limited in a bourgeois society, you need to have a kind of organization and a kind of organizational framework and, you know,
institution that can combat those kinds of repressive tendencies. And if you're mobilizing people, we are the Communist Party, this is what we want you to do. You become an easy target. You become an incredibly easy target for that kind of governmental repression. And to be fair, in the historical example, groups like the Congress of American Women, or, you know, other kinds of United Front, Popular Front groups that were designed to kind of engage those liberal constituencies in struggles, they were targeted during the McCarthy period. They were forced to disband, but also there are also ways in which they were able to operate under those kinds of conditions that other groups were not. And so I think that it requires us to be frank and to be kind of objective about this, that like sometimes you're going to have to work with people or take positions that don't make you feel correct. And it's, you know, the kind of, we have to reframe the equation of, do we want to always come out and have this exact correct position that feels, you know, morally correct or morally good, or do we want to have a winning position? And I think that, you know, if I personally claim to win, not to, you know, intellectualize. And so I think that that's part of what the use of the United Front is it allows you to do that kind of math work outside of the, you know, extent of, but outside the limits of a traditional kind of democratic centralist organization.
Absolutely. I think, right, we're trying to build a mass movement. You have to mobilize these people, and through, right, our unity with these other groups, and through our struggle with them, we will also raise the political consciousness of a lot of people, because they will see the inefficacies of those organizations, right? So through the struggle, people will raise their political consciousness. Anyone have anything else? Please.
Sorry to bring up Cameron Poe again, but it also deals with like the popular front period, and I think one of the things that it talks about is like while you're doing that, also dealing with the contradiction that those groups can impose things that will actually, like, figuring out the things that are hard lines, you know what I mean? Because in so many ways, the United Front period in the US with the Communist Liberal Alliance did give up on racial equality over time. And that, you know, hurt the CP's cause, or at least that's the obvious position. So yeah, I think those are the kind of things that you have to watch out for as you build larger alliances, that you can never, you know, in the case of like the ordinance, like the alliance knew that no, we never give up on this piece, that we need higher power, you know, as part of this, you know, like figuring out what the lines are.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely.
Not negotiable.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone have anything else? I think we have a couple breakout discussions. I don't know how we're doing on time.
Yeah, it's 2:16, so I definitely want to be mindful of people's
Yeah.
attention
We-
spans.
I feel like we've had actually a lot of good discussion,
Yeah.
and this community control, I think we've also kind of touched on.
Yeah.
We can go into the like,
Action
and
items?
yeah.
That's perfect.
Perfect. So I just want to kind of touch on the goals of the Alliance. We touched a little bit on this already. Right now, our primary goals are recruitment. We want to grow the Alliance through tabling, flyers, general body meetings, etc. You know, like I said before, activists are the backbone, community members and families who have been affected by police crimes are the fuel. We want to do outreach. I'm the outreach chair of the Alliance. We want to make people aware of community control as a strategy, show people that it's effective in curtailing the power of the police and how it's been successful in many cities, especially Chicago. We want to find and make connections with families who have been victimized by police violence and, you know, build campaigns around them. We also want to, like I said, build the United Front, partner with more progressive organizations that are committed to the Alliance's work. And then also political education, right? We want to raise the political consciousness of the members of the Alliance and turn community members into activists and organizers. And so last slide, to get involved with our work. So you can join the DC Alliance by becoming a general member, join our signal chat, participate in our general body meetings. Our next general body meeting is March 2nd at the Black Workers Center. The times in the afternoon, you have to check our Instagram for the exact time, but it's, I think, in the afternoon. You can join our local conference planning committee and help plan our local conference. I know Dante and a couple of the other members of the conference would very much appreciate that help. Join us for weekly tabling. If you're interested in that, please, let me know. Reach out to the Alliance and we can get you plugged in. Yeah, just follow us on social media. The National Alliance also this year is holding a march on the RNC and the DNC. They're bringing Alliance chapters from all over the country together to mobilize for those. It's looking like it's going to be huge. I will be definitely at the DNC one. And yeah, if you're interested in that, please reach out to us and we can help, mobilize everyone out for that. Other than that, I don't think I have anything else. I just want to say thank you to the Claudia Jones School for hosting. Coming out. That's all I got.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Another round of applause for John.